accusing Moscow of outlaw actions at the UN.
We call on Russia to respect its international obligations and not obstruct or harass Ukraine's transit in the Kerch Strait, and to de-escalate the tensions it has created. The United States would welcome a normal relationship with Russia. But outlaw actions like this one continue to make that impossible.
Straight to Rich Edson, State Department this morning, and Secretary Pompeo says the two sides need to dial down the tension. How's that going to go, Rich?
Yeah, good morning, Bill. And the State Department says the secretary wants President Vladimir Putin of Russia and Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to work this out directly. Though in a statement, the secretary also says, quote, "We call on Russia to return to Ukraine its vessels and detained crew members, and to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders extending to its territorial waters." The State Department also says Secretary Pompeo has spoken with Ukrainian President Poroshenko about what the secretary describes as Russian aggression against Ukraine. Russia claims Ukraine sent warships through the Kerch Strait without permission. The Russian embassy in Washington posted on its Facebook, quote, "We call upon the United States to finally curb their Ukrainian stooges. The current radical nationalist and neo-Nazi lawlessness in Ukraine must end." It is unclear what the United States is considering in response, though Ambassador Haley did mention that the United States will maintain the sanctions on Russia for its 2014 seizure of Crimea, which is right in the neighborhood of where all this is happening, Bill.
In the meantime, we try and figure out whether or not Russia and Ukraine in turn will escalate this even further, right, Rich?
Right. Well, Russia says, according to its state media, that it's initiating court proceedings against the sailors that are still in its custody, the Ukrainian sailors in its custody. And on top of that, you've got Ukraine now that has declared martial law for 30 days in areas bordering Russia or areas bordering Russian allied or controlled areas. President Trump spoke briefly about this incident yesterday, says he's not happy about it. He is expected to meet with Russian President Putin later this week at the G20 summit in Argentina. Bill?
Thank you, Rich. Rich Edson, State Department, leading our coverage this hour. Thank you.
You look at what's happening on our border, and you see people coming up by the thousands. And frankly, if we didn't show them strength and a strong border, and nobody's shown a stronger border, if we didn't do that, you would have hundreds of thousands of people pouring into our country. We are doing a job, and we will continue to do a job. We're doing what's right.
That was President Trump at a rally last night in Mississippi, doubling down on his administration's response after hundreds of illegal immigrants rushed our southern border and clashed with federal agents. This coming as new DHS numbers show there are now 8,500 migrants in Tijuana, Mexico, the overwhelming majority of them not eligible for asylum in the U.S. Griff Jenkins is live from Tijuana this morning for us. Griff.
Sandra, good morning. We are inside the Benito Juarez Sports Stadium where the majority, 6,000 or more of those migrants are being held. Let me just let our viewers have a look around. We'll take you through. It's obviously just a little after 7, so you see people just waking up, but you can see very quickly just how tight the quarters are in here. If you've got 5,000 or 6,000 people, and the difficulties of trying to be here for not just a day or two, but now some going on 2 weeks, 14, 15 days. We know also from actually Secretary Nielsen's press statement yesterday that they do believe that as many as 600 of them may have a criminal past. And the most interesting that you mentioned, which is that the majority of them would not be eligible for asylum. And what you're looking at here, Sandra, is really the big question and the real problem. Obviously, more incidents like what we saw on Sunday will not be tolerated. We hear from the Mexican officials they actually are going to or already have deported as many as 98 of the folks involved in that already. But the question ultimately that has to be asked is, what do you do with these people? Because even if they qualified for asylum, which Nielsen says they won't, they have to stay somewhere. And staying in conditions like these that you're seeing right now are certainly not something that would be able to go on for months, and some say even years, to process these asylum claims. That's why there was some talk over the weekend of cooperation between the incoming Mexican government and new President Lopez Obrador and the Trump administration in exchange for keeping the migrants in Mexico. in exchange for speeding up the asylum process. But again, when you get a little bit of a view here and you look at these conditions right here, they can't remain here. So the problem is certainly intensified. I can tell you in the overnight hours when I was here, Sandra, we saw two groups of about a dozen folks that decided they were going to try a softer spot of the wall and go on their own. They were not able to get over. The Border Patrol turned them around. That is the wall in the distance there. So we're just in the shadow as we sort of kind of continue to monitor the situation here as people are waking up. Sandra?
Big questions as to what happens next. Griff Jenkins on the ground there in Tijuana. Thank you.
Perspective. Fox News alert now. President Trump in Mississippi twice yesterday stumping for the Republican incumbent who is on the ballot today in that runoff election.
Tomorrow we need the people of Mississippi to go to the polls and elect Sidney Hyde-Smith so that we can continue doing what we're doing, which is frankly unprecedented.
I want to bring in America's A-Team, David Avella, chairman of GOPAC and a Republican strategist. Welcome back.
Hello.
Adrienne Elrod, former director of strategic communications for Hillary Clinton campaign. Adrienne, hello.
Thank you.
And
Hi.
John Bussey from the Wall Street Journal and Fox News contributor. And John, good to have you on the panel here. Great panel, by the way. Just saying, great panel right
Every
here.
day.
Is Mississippi a race?
No. She will win tonight.
A lot of attention going down there.
How come? Whether she wins by 51, 55, or 60, she's called U.S. Senator. And she will win tonight. Look at the election results on November 6th. You take the two Democrats together, they got about 45% of the vote. That's what Espy's going to get tonight, 44, 45% of the vote. She wins 90,
What does
55,
it say
45.
that we've gotten to this point, though, that it has gotten to this point?
It's a runoff election in Mississippi, and that's how these occur. And but tonight, she is going to win.
Adrienne?
Well, you sound very confident there, David. Look, I do think the Republicans have a slight advantage in this race, but it's become very competitive for a lot of reasons, including some of the things that Hyde-Smith, the Republican candidate, has said publicly about attending a public hanging. It's become very divisive. If Mike Espy can turn out the African American vote, he will do very well. He may actually pull out a strong win here. So, I mean, I don't know. Winning a race in Mississippi statewide would be huge. This hasn't happened, I think, since like the 1970s. But they do have a democratically elected attorney general, which is one of the only southern states that actually has a democratically elected statewide official. So there is, the numbers are there in the state if Democrats turn out.
John?
He's got headwinds, right? It's a red state. And the Democrats have kind of written this off for a lot of years. And so there's no ground game. There's no network there to get out the vote for the Democrat. On the other hand, it will make a difference what this margin is, because he is hoping to get his surfboard out and surf this blue wave and the political phenomenon that we see now in the United States of suburban educated women, particularly defecting from the Republican Party and voting Democrat. How much of that's going to happen in Mississippi? This is going to be something of an opportunity for us to look forward to 2020, I think.
Ronna McDaniel weighed in on that with Bill last hour. How do you get that back?
This is a pundit's dream to talk about this. Look at real numbers. A Democrat hasn't gotten over 45% in a statewide election in a long time. If Mike Espy was the bee's knees that everybody thinks he is, then why is national money not pouring into his race right now? Why are the Democrats spending a pathetic amount of money nationally to try to help him get elected while Republicans are supporting Senator Smith? They're not going all in. This is all talk. And you know who the biggest winner in all this is? Mississippi voters who today get to no longer see political ads and join the rest of America that now election season is over.
I think most people thought that 2 weeks ago. What do 53 Republican senators do to a Democratic agenda in the House?
To a Democratic agenda? Like, how do 53 Republican senators impact a Democratic agenda?
That's the question.
Well, I think, first of all, we've got to checks and balances in the Congress finally. So you're going to see Democrats trying to work with Republicans. If they'll play ball, we'll see, on a number of kitchen table issues like lowering the cost of prescription drugs, addressing the health care crisis, addressing health care costs, and raising wages. I mean, those are issues that Americans voted for Democrats for. That is why we saw such a strong blue wave.
The reason I asked that, I don't know if it's gridlock, John, for 2 years, or if there's some sort of compromise that they can work on.
Yeah, the margin in the Senate's not going to matter as much for gridlock. It definitely helps the Republicans. There's no question. it gives President Trump that much more leverage against moderates who might sort of get in the way of his agenda in the Senate. On the other hand, it's a Democratic House now, and that's where the gridlock comes in. It's going to be very tough for President Trump to get policies through the Congress that require the approval of both chambers.
Meanwhile, the showdown at the border, and the president certainly was focusing on that last night. I want to bring you the latest that we're hearing from Secretary Nielsen on this caravan. As we know now, 8,500 of those migrants in Tijuana. We just saw the live report from Griff Jenkins there. She says this administration warned about the dangers of the caravan. We predicted the violence we saw on Sunday. We prepared to address it with additional personnel and DOD deployments. We will continue to prepare for the next assault while looking for lasting solutions with Congress and our Mexican partners. Where does this go next?
This goes to what we were just talking about. If you want to get something done, if Democrats and Republicans in Congress want to get something done, we have to do it now, because the incoming class that's going to rule the Democratic Party in the House came in a message of resistance. They're not looking for solutions to work with the president. There isn't. No one talked about, I want to go to Washington to work with the president to solve America's problems. Not this Democratic House. We didn't hear that. So to find an answer, it has to happen right now. And the message, and no one is talking about this, if we want to solve this problem, if this is the moral dilemma that Democrats talk about, then what they're really saying is we need to look at regime change down in South America. Because the reason these migrants are willing to cross all the way up to America to get into America is because they live in conditions they don't want to live under, and or those who may have bad intentions. If we really want to solve this problem, what Democrats are really saying is we need to look at putting different leaders in to make those countries better.
Go back to last night. This is Mississippi. Donald Trump talking about illegal aliens here in the U.S. and the whole immigration matter. He said this. Watch.
Every single day we are finding the illegal alien gang members and predators, and we are either throwing them the hell out of here, putting them in jail, or just plain getting them out of our country as nicely as possible.
John, are you able to take a 30,000-foot view of this under this administration, whether or not they have truly impacted change on this issue? Because it seems as if they're not building the wall per se by definition, but they are contributing to it. And we have seen that movement over the past 2 years.
Yeah, so the president's agenda has been delayed, hasn't it, by the courts, by lack of momentum in the Congress. And this is not a new issue. One administration after another, Democrat and Republican, has really kind of failed to address the illegal immigration problem in the United States. How is this going to play out? I think that most people feel that the rule of law should prevail here, and you're not allowed to cross the border illegally. On the other hand, unless there's some mechanism set up, either camps in Mexico, camps in Honduras to keep people there, increased processing for asylum. Mind you, a lot of people still won't get asylum. They won't pass the rigorous requirements for that. How much of that will prevent what will otherwise happen, which is that if people gather in those camps, they can't get in, guess what? They're going to try to cross the border illegally.
Adrian?
Look, first of all, we don't really know how many people are seeking asylum right now because they're not allowed to actually go through the typical asylum process. So there are a lot of people that we know who are living in a state of purgatory at the border. But let's be clear. First of all, the optics look terrible for the president because children and mothers, young mothers, were tear gassed. I mean, everybody saw the visual.
Hang on one moment. Hang on. This is Kellyanne Conway addressed that earlier today. Just want to be on record for this. From the White House, she said this on Fox and Friends. Watch.
Mainstream media only wants you to see the children, the families. They're not telling you that most of the caravan are males traveling by themselves, that, of course, projectiles and rocks were thrown at our brave men and women at the border, and they use non-lethal force in response because they have a right to defend themselves and to make sure that others who are there are not harmed.
What did she say that was not true there?
Look, I will concede that there are bad actors down there. I mean, I'm certainly not defending everybody's intentions down there at the border, but what I will say is that there are people who are fleeing to the United States, trying to seek asylum because they are fleeing horrific situations in places like Guatemala, where gang violence is rampant. You know, some mothers who were interviewed were talking about fleeing their husband who was raping them.
Right, but you started going off on the tear gas. I just want to be clear, you know, the Border Patrol, they have a job to do. And
that was mandated by the
you
president.
don't
The
know
president
what
of the
their-
United States,
You don't
the
know
one
what
who
their
allowed
position
tear
is
gas to
at
be
the time
used.
that decision was made. But listen, stand by, okay? We got some great topics coming up, all right? Going to leave this alone for the moment because there's a lot of business news, too.
General
Stand by
Motors
those
shutting
things.
down 5 factories and laying off thousands of workers.
The reality is this is just a corporation, a greedy corporation, trying to make more money off of the backs of employees.
Well, the employees are not the only ones not happy about this. President Trump is not liking it either. Charles Payne will join us to break this all down and what it means.
Also waiting on that vote in Mississippi, we're learning suburban women coming out strong for Democrats in the midterms. How can Republicans win that critical voting bloc back? Carly Fiorina is our headliner. We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up shortly, right here.
America must lead, because when we do not lead, when this exceptional nation does not lead, the world is a more dangerous and a more tragic place.
Charles Payne is here. There's no delaying the pain in the Rust Belt. General Motors will close 5 factories and lay off nearly 15,000 workers. Charles Payne, host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network. You've been looking at all of this. What does this tell us?
A couple of things. First of all, this is it reveals a major flat-footedness at General Motors. The mistakes that they've made in the last couple of years coming home to roost, and now they're using really ham-fisted tactics to try to address them. Listen, Americans, we have been pulling away from cars for a long time. They got all of these cars that nobody's buying, but by the same token, we are buying SUVs, we're buying crossovers, we're buying pickup trucks. Last quarter, let me tell you how amazing this is. Their volume went down in North America by 10%, and they still had record net income, record earnings, and record all-time average selling price. So the company is making money. They're making big-time money. They've been caught flat-footed. The industry has been worried for 2 years that we're at a peak for sales, and I think this is a drastic move on their part. It's a gargantuan mistake, and it's one hell of a way to say thank. It's a public relations mistake. It's one hell of a way to say thank you to America for the $51 billion bailout that you lost $11 billion on to begin with. Yeah,
They were the recipient.
They were the majority
I told
recipient.
Sandra, this news broke when you were sitting here yesterday, and all we really had was the headline. I think as the day went on, the news sunk in, and this news it's not good for these people.
It's
who live
not
in
good.
These states.
Last quarter,
Michigan, Ohio.
last quarter, the company did $35 billion in 3 months. 77% came from North American customers. 87% of operating income came from North American business. So yeah, you can build out factories all over the world, but the Americans are keeping you in business, and you kick them to the curb at the first sign of trouble.
So the president's not happy. He's shooting back at Mary Barra, who, by the way, happened to be at the White House yesterday for a pre-scheduled meeting with Larry Kudlow. We don't really know what was discussed there, but the president's fired back, saying that they should make a better car, that he was very tough on GM's Barra over these plant closures. So he's not happy.
No, he shouldn't be happy, of course. I don't think any American president would be happy about this. And again, it's not like they're in dire straits. Now, they're trying to get ahead of things. They want a big fat cash flow. But this is why I think capitalism in of itself is in a lot of trouble in this country. Because, you know, these companies keep posting record earnings and they keep firing people. They keep posting record earnings and they keep buying back billions of dollars of their own stock. The American public is going to get hip to this, and my fear is that they're going to end up electing not a democratic socialist, just a straight-up socialist because of these kind of shenanigans. They should have saw this coming a long time ago.
Topic number 2, the markets were flying yesterday, down a little bit today, Cyber Monday. How did we do?
We had a record. Yeah, we had a record. I didn't buy anything online, though. But we did have a record, and 20% to $2 billion came from smartphones. So it's again,
$2 billion?
$2 billion of the sales yesterday came from smartphones. It's just really amazing that.
That's Apple.
Mostly
Samsung?
Apple, Samsung,
Google?
Yeah. Here's the thing. Since November 1st until Cyber Monday, we have been well ahead of anything anybody thought. The American consumer continues to step up to the plate, continues to spend big money, and that's the optimism out there that gets very little coverage.
Did you hear the breaking news, though? Charles Payne did not shop on Cyber Monday. That alone is going to drop sales 25%. The market's down 82 points.
Someone used my debit card over the weekend. They bought a $521 American Express gift certificate and $100 in a college somewhere. So I didn't have a credit card yesterday.
Whoa!
Oh.
Yeah,
Otherwise, he would have been.
I would have done my part.
Quickly, Microsoft passed Apple for just a brief second in market cap.
Yeah, that's more of the story of Apple falling apart, down $200 billion in market cap. Since their earnings report, what they told us, they would stop telling us how many iPhones they sold. That was a mistake, and it's going to continue to haunt them for a long time.
Thank you, Charles. See you at 2 o'clock, Fox Business.
Okay.
Mike Espy in Mississippi. He is speaking now. Let's go to it live.
Moments ago, he said this. Do we have it?
6. And you could ask anyone. We had the best organized campaign in Mississippi up to that point. And it was mainly boots on the ground. We organized the precincts and the zones because Mississippi is a very rural state. We don't have a lot of urban centers like Atlanta and like they have in Florida. We have rural zones. So you have to recruit people that other people know. So we had folks on our election payroll for almost a year ahead of time, getting to know the folks in their neighborhoods, in their polls, getting to know them, encouraging them to get out to vote that November. And that was a district that was not majority black. I want to remind everyone, go back and look. In 1986, in the 2nd District of Mississippi, the poorest district in Mississippi, the poorest state, it was about a 53% gross black population. So it was a slight majority population. But when you have to discount for voting age population and then registration, it was about 46 or 45% African American. And I won 85% black, 11% white. I beat the governor's grandson. I beat the senator's nephew in the primary, and then I came and I beat the incumbent Republican in 1986. And then as things progressed, and people believed that I would serve everyone, when I ran in 1992, I got 95% of the black vote and 40% of the white vote. And it's just not because I wore great suits or my personality was sterling. It's because I served everyone equally.
It was 2 weeks ago today where no candidate reached 50%. That's the reason why you've got a runoff today. That's Mike Espy, the Democratic candidate, going up against the Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith. They are voting now in Mississippi. A Republican victory puts them at 53, a gain of 2 in the U.S. Senate, so we will see how it goes.
All right,
How are you?
more on that coming up.
All
Doing
right,
well.
right on.
Here we go. Well, a lot more news on the economy.
Yeah, all this economic news certainly plays a role at the ballot box. Brand new reaction in a moment from businesswoman and former presidential candidate Carly Fiorina. She is coming up live in a moment after the break here.
Really looking forward to having her. Plus, a new push for criminal justice reform could be one of the few things both parties can agree on.
If our criminal justice system is unjust, if our sentencing is unjust, then that's what we ought to be focusing on. But that has not been demonstrated to me.
30 Fox News alert now. Voters casting their ballots in the runoff election now in Mississippi. Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith trying to fight the upset bid by the Democratic challenger Mike Espy. President Trump doing his part. 2 stops on Monday in the state of Mississippi.
I'm here to ask the people of Mississippi to send Cindy Hyde-Smith back to the United States Senate so we can make America great again. Your vote on Tuesday will decide whether we build on our extraordinary achievements or whether we empower the radical Democrats to obstruct our progress.
From last night, this morning, our headliner. Carly Fiorina, former Hewlett-Packard CEO and 2016 Republican presidential candidate. It's nice to see you again. It has been some time, and welcome back to America's Newsroom.
Well, thanks. Great to be with you, Bill, and good morning, Sandra.
Good morning.
You talk a lot about leadership. That's a big part of your professional and personal focus. How would you rate the leadership on behalf of President Trump over the last 2 years?
Well, I think President Trump has accomplished many of the things he said he was going to do, and leaders keep their promises. On the other hand, I think it's also true that leaders understand how they do things is as important as what they do, because leaders have to build support over time. And I think what we're seeing as a result of the midterm elections is that while President Trump's base remains solidly with him, he is not building support. He's not growing support. And I think over time, that puts his agenda at risk.
How does he do that, Carly, particularly with the female suburban voter? According to our Fox voter analysis of all Suburban women, 57% voted for Democratic candidates, 38% for Republican candidates. How does the Republican Party win back that suburban women vote?
You know, it's interesting. We've talked about this before. In fact, we talked about this during the 2016 election. First of all, I would say that women are problem solvers. Women focus on solving problems because they need to solve a lot of problems in their lives and in the lives of their families and in their jobs. And so I think women focus very much on our problems getting solved, our results being achieved. It's also true that women care about tone and language, and women get concerned when the tone is divisive and the language is harsh. And so I would say that Republicans' policies so often lift people up, and Democrats' policies so often keep people right where they are, as Mia Love has famously said many times. But I also think that problems only get solved if you bring people together instead of dividing people apart. And tone and language can drive people apart or bring people together. And in the end, I think real leadership is about solving problems, not just talking about solving
you
problems.
Got a lot of
which
attention.
Politicians too
you
often
got a lot
do.
of attention out of California 2 years ago. You sound a little bit like you might be considering it again. Are you running? Do you have plans to challenge Donald Trump in a primary?
No, heavens no. What I am focused on is the same thing I've been focused on for many decades, which is what is real leadership about? And real leadership is not about title or position, although many leaders have titles and positions. Real leadership is about problem solving. Real leadership is about building support. Real leadership is about lifting people up and bringing them together, not tearing people down and driving them apart. Real leadership is about courage and character and seeing possibilities in circumstances, and also importantly, seeing possibilities in the people all around us. I ran for president in 2016 because I believe we need more citizen leaders. And on the podcast that goes live today, I lift up citizen leaders all across this country. Some you've heard of and some you haven't. Because I think we need more examples of real leadership and real problem solving.
And obviously, you are speaking from a role. You were the CEO of Hewlett Packard. I believe you were the first woman to head up a Fortune top 20 company. When you look at what the president is doing, and I know you spoke a lot about this during the 2016 campaign, you talked a lot about China and the impact of China on our economy, on the global economy. The president's Wall Street Journal interview, he says that the only deal would be China has to open up their country to competition from the U.S. What I'd advise is for them to build factories in the United States and to make the product here. Just want to get your thoughts as you have been watching the Trump economy and the president's policies play out, how you think he's doing there.
Well, first, I certainly agree with the administration that the relationship we have with China is unbalanced, more and more so. It's unbalanced from a military perspective, and it's unbalanced from a trade perspective. Where I would differ is, first of all, of course, China is manufacturing in the U.S. They've bought U.S. companies. I think it is time, way past time, for us to send strong messages militarily to the Chinese. President Obama failed to do that. And the result is I'm sorry, I'm hearing a busy tone in my ear.
Go ahead,
Anyway,
Carly.
the result is a situation in the South China Sea where we have a military buildup. It is also true that the trade imbalance is a problem. However, tariffs don't really work, and I think we're seeing that. When Ford and GM both say they're now having to swallow costs of $700 million to $1 billion, that costs jobs. I would rather see President Trump say this to China: you will play by the rules in our country that we have to play by in your country. And that means you can't list your companies on the New York Stock Exchange unless we can list our companies on the Chinese Stock Exchange. And it also means that you can't buy or invest in American companies until we can buy and invest in Chinese companies without government approval or government interference.
Very interesting. President Trump on that rally last night was talking about this, how he would deal with China. Very interesting ideas there. Just listen to this from Mississippi.
We racked up $4.5 trillion in trade deficits with China since they entered the WTO, that's the World Trade Organization, which other than NAFTA is probably the worst trade deal any country has ever entered. And we entered it, and that's what built China into the power. But now we're the big power. We're far more powerful, and that's the way we're going to keep it.
That's from Mississippi, as I mentioned. Carly Fiorina's got a new podcast out that she mentioned as well. It's called By Example, and it debuts today, and that's part of the reason why you're joining us today. And if we've reestablished a signal with you, go ahead and give a pitch for that podcast. Okay?
I can tell you a little bit about that podcast because there's a lot of interest in it. And because she is a pioneer in her field, and as I mentioned, one of the first female CEOs of a big Fortune company, Fortune top 20 company, she is sitting down in this new podcast, By Example, and talking to leaders of all industries. And it's really actually a fascinating idea. And for Carly Fiorina to be conducting those interviews should really be something.
It's interesting to hear from her again because she's been somewhat quiet publicly anyway, you know, going back to the election of 2016. But when she came on that stage in Cleveland, I remember because Martha and I were sitting there and they came out, a group of 7. We had the first debate before the big debate that night. And Carly Fiorina got a lot of attention, and she quickly moved up the ladder for that election. So now she's out there yet again. So we hope to get her.
For coming.
By Example, the podcast, in the meantime, is beginning to look a lot like 2020. Oh, really? The Democratic field already has several big names. It's getting bigger, Sandra. 2 more high-profile candidates say they may be ready to make a move for the primary. Stand on by. 2 more big-name politicians eyeing a run for 2020. Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders are back with America's A-Team. David Avella, Adrian Elrod, and John Bussey. Did you guys work it out in the green room? All good?
All good.
Dan Pfeiffer says this. Let's take quote number 2, guys, with regard to Beto. No one knows what voters will be looking for 2 years from now, and no one never knows how good candidates are until they stand up in diners in New Hampshire and Iowa and try to explain why they, out of 300+ million Americans, are best suited to become president. But to write Beto off is to repeat the same mistake pundits made with Obama. You're a witness.
Brilliant. Dan Pfeiffer's a good friend of mine, and he always is right on the mark. Look, we've got a lot of people who are considering running for president. Beto O'Rourke energized the Democratic base, electrified the base like we have not seen in a long time. So did Stacey Abrams, so did Andrew Gillum. So to write him off, Pfeiffer's exactly right when he says this is what pundits did to Obama when he was a state senator in, Illinois and got on the national stage. So I think we're going to have a lot of exciting people to look at in the field.
John?
He ran an interesting race against a guy who is not dissimilar from Donald Trump in demeanor. So he's gotten some pretty good experience, and it was close, but at the end of the day, he lost. So the fact that we're talking about a candidacy by a losing politician says something right now about the field that the Democrats have, which is it's wide open. We don't know who's going to run. We're talking about possibly Biden and Sanders in their mid-70s now. They'll be in their late 70s when this election's happening. We don't know who's going to run. He is a charismatic figure who did galvanize the Democratic voter.
Interesting.
We talk about 2020 Democratic candidates, and none of my Democratic colleagues ever bring up Michael Avenatti, who's also talking about running as a Democrat. Candidates right now are less important than process. And here's a date for everyone to keep in mind, and that is December the 5th. And that's when the New Hampshire legislature will pick the next Secretary of State. And the Democrats in the House have said that for the first time in over 20-some years, they may not allow the Republican to stay in as Secretary of State. Now, Gardner has had a history of protecting New Hampshire's status as early in the process. If a Democrat, a partisan Democrat, I would remind you, gets in, won't have the stature. Now, what if California decides to leap forward in the nomination process?
It might.
Okay? And now you have a huge advantage for Kamala Harris. Now, what if it stays the same? That helps someone like Elizabeth Warren. So who's talking about running on any given day isn't as important as a process.
Got it. Here's Beto O'Rourke from yesterday. No decision yet is apparently what his comment is. Watch.
Amy and I made a decision not to rule anything out, and just to be open. The best advice that I've received from people who've run for and won and run for and lost elections like this is don't make any decisions about anything until you've had some time to hang with your family and just be, just be human.
My guess is he's running, but we'll wait and see, okay, for a final decision. In the meantime, Mia Love, who lost an election in the state of Utah, Republican, just by the most narrow of margins, she's throwing daggers at just about anybody. This is what she said yesterday regarding President Trump.
This gave me a clear vision of his world as it is. No real relationships, just convenient transactions. That is an insufficient way to implement sincere service and policy.
Surprised by that, David?
I've been doing this for 20-some years now, and I probably can count on one hand the number of losing candidates who actually blame themselves for their loss. And there is often the everybody's fault except my own. Candidates are ultimately the ones that voters vote on and who is on the ballot. And you need to be held responsible for that. But let me make one last plug on Giving Tuesday. Don't forget your favorite Republican organization, GoPac, as you make your donations
Right, you did
today.
get that in there. The president's words, I'll remind you, Adrian. Mia Love gave me no love, and she lost. Too bad. Sorry about that, Mia.
Yeah, look, if Mia Love had embraced President Trump more on the campaign trail, I think she would have lost by more because her district includes Salt Lake City, which is a largely suburban area. Suburban voters flocked in droves to Democrats this cycle. That's how Democrats took back the House. So, it's Trump's own prerogative, I guess, if he wants to go after his own fellow Republicans. But I think if she had embraced him more, she would have lost by a wider margin.
She was really seen as a rising star in the Republican Party 4 to 6 years ago. She didn't just go after President Trump. She went after Republicans in Washington with regard to minority voters. She went after opponents, called him a wolf in sheep's clothing, and said, I am unleashed. I am untethered. I am unshackled. I can say exactly what's on my mind.
Yeah. So Mia Love's comment about President Trump was in reaction to his gratuitous slam of hers, after the election, saying, she didn't show me any love, she lost. And she's a reflection of several things that Republicans have to be concerned about going into the 2020 race. They have a suburban women problem. They have an educated voter problem. They have a minority voter problem. And Mia Love's reflection of possibly, for centrist Republicans, a Donald Trump problem.
David?
My advice to my fellow Republicans is we are more united than we are apart. And to allow Democrats and the media to stoke these divisions is only hurtful to us. And Republicans need to be mindful we are more together than not. But it is laughable to hear Democrats say Mia Love is a stateswoman for her willingness to criticize President Trump, but President Trump is completely wrong when he criticizes another Republican. Now, Republicans shouldn't be criticizing Republicans, but let's keep in mind Democrats are not being genuine when they're here trying to stoke division.
It is Giving Tuesday. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Adrian. John, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, A-Team. It is the season, speaking of which, for spending. Retailers breaking in the dough as Cyber Monday sales hit a historic high. And wait until you see these new numbers. For the history books, breaking the online sales record with, $7.9 billion spent. Brett Larson. Is this true?
That is a lot. Yes, it is true.
That's a lot of vacuums.
That is a lot of vacuums, which I purchased. The thing that I like about Cyber Monday and how we talk about online shopping year over year is I'm glad to see it's on an upward trajectory because it's still relatively new. People are still kind of finding it for the first time. But it was definitely a huge year. Amazon saying that it was historic. It was the biggest shopping days in the history of Amazon, which has been around now, if you can believe it, for almost a quarter of a century. The other interesting little tidbit that I took away from some of the after the Cyber Monday sales data is that a lot of the shopping, the most of it was done in Denver, Colorado, and then it was also in other large cities. So I'm curious to see where broadband is available, readily available in the U.S. versus where it's not. If the online shopping was was good there.
Interesting.
In more rural areas where you don't really have a super fast connection, are you going to take a little bit of extra time for the ability to shop from home? And these are also areas that are adversely hit by retail stores closing and what have you. But I definitely think year over year we're going to continue to see
every year
is going to goes higher.
What did you buy yesterday? And did you get a deal?
I got a deal on a Hoover vacuum because that's what you do on Cyber Monday.
So wait, this was okay. $7.9 billion.
$7.9 billion.
A lot of vacuums.
Put that in perspective, as I always tell Bill to do when he's looking at the stock market change.
Yes.
What's the percent? That's a 20% increase.
Yeah, no, it's
That's
huge. It's bigger than it's bigger year over year from this year to last year than it was from last year to the previous year.
Pretty good.
Now we just have to wait for Take It Back Tuesday.
Hammer, what'd you get me?
I'm working on. I can't tell you now. You
got to get it with gift wrapping, Hammer.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, guys.
Paul Manafort's accused of lying. Did Special Counsel Bob Mueller just lose his most valuable witness? Alan Dershowitz is here next hour, America's Newsroom, and a big celebration at NASA. We are back on Mars, and Mike Massimino's got a lot to say about that. Do not miss this amazing accomplishment. Coming up.
If you are considering silver for your safe capital, now you can receive $200, $500, up to $2,000 worth of these all-new Silver Snowy